Good morning. According to McKinsey, only 15% of frontline workers and leaders actually find purpose in their work. Couple that with 25% of Americans who actually don't know what gives their lives meaning. Just 25%. Couple that with a pandemic, with quiet quitting, and a study by Indeed that says 92% of folks that changed their job twice since March of 2020 actually can't stay in a job that they're passionate about, right? They've got to have something that lights their passion. What I'm getting at is there's no better time than right now to ignite the spark of a caring culture to help our staff find meaning in their work. Next slide. Do I advance or how to? Yes. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Getting set up. Sorry. This is. So igniting the spark. What I'm talking about, if you heard me last year, you talked a lot about Stephen Kotler's work, where we have to embrace our staff's curiosities, right? Curiosities turn into passions, passions turn into purpose. Spending time with our staff so they understand what they're curious about, what they love, will help them move from being a job to a career to hopefully a calling. Our Sisters of Providence always talk about the fact 8 to 5. If you're in a job, you're in the grind, that's one thing. Hopefully you're part of a career arc. I've always felt as a CPA I was in a career. It's when I was actually called to this particular position at Providence that I felt like the universe actually brought me here for a reason. And that's a unique place to be. There's a lot of people talking about burnout today, but when you have that internal fire, that nuclear fusion of a purpose and a calling, it's really hard to even talk about burnout. I can't really sometimes resonate with it. Couple that with setting standards of excellence, as well as balancing the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment, and you create a culture that has a vision of doing what you love in service of others who love what you do. So one of the key questions there in the start is kind of doing what you love. If you've ever had a conversation with your staff on what parts of their task, everybody has a job description, nobody really looks at it ever again, but if you ever think about what they do all day, what do they love? There's certain parts of the job they just love, and you can see it when they actually do it. There's actually those other parts, and we've mentioned clinician compensation here twice this morning. I don't know if I love that all the time, right? But I do love the fact that if my physicians don't have to think about their compensation, if they don't have to wonder where the paycheck is coming from and what's on it, I feel like they'll probably be more engaged with those sacred encounters that are happening in our clinics every day. And so I need a team that does what they love. We don't actually see patients. We don't actually get to touch them. Clinicians do. But we get to touch all the things that would allow them to focus and bring their best selves in service of others. We also want to try and create raving fans as a finance team, right? We want people to love what we do. Sometimes we do have to draw the line. Sometimes we've got to point out we're not making as much money as we should. Sometimes there's layoffs. Right now we are in an economic winter for sure, right? There's cutbacks, there's layoffs, there's people heading for the exits. I was humbled actually in the last 6 weeks. I've actually had 2 of my folks decide to step off the train. One of them is actually moving on within Providence, which is a nice promotion. But I'm sitting here trying to recruit people to also do what we love in service of others who love what we do. And I always start with foundational principles. One of my first chief executives was Gary Peck, God rest his soul. He's one of the best rural healthcare CEOs I think we've ever had in the state. I apologize to anybody who's been a rural CEO and disagrees with that. But Gary Peck was a great guy. If you knew Gary, we studied, there was an article by Harvard back in, probably in the late 90s. It was talking about what people want. Purpose, praise, and participation. Those were the 3 Ps that Gary kind of did everything around. Everybody wants purpose. We want to find purpose in our life. We also want praise. Mary Kay from Mary Kay's Cosmetics says people crave praise more than they desire sex. So how much praise are you giving your staff? Right? We've got to give our people praise. We've got to acknowledge even the small wins. And then we all want participation. We want to be part of the team. We want to contribute. I've added some different principles over time. Now, it's kind of kitschy because I have to come up with P words, but I also look for positivity. I think everybody wants positivity on a team. Everybody wants to bring their passion. Staff want to be proficient. I'm talking to the choir because you guys are here. you're educating yourself so you can go back and serve at a higher capacity. That's what HFMA is. I've been in this HFMA for about 30 years, MGMA for about 25 years. I love the conferences. By the way, the January symposium, phenomenal this year. If you didn't go, it was amazing. I do think that's actually one of the best seminars that I've ever attended in a long time, and it's been a long time since I've been to one. Staff also want privacy. Now, the better word there is autonomy, and what better now when we have remote workers? Most of my staff are now religious about working from home. I don't think I'll ever get them back in space, mainly because I did give up their space, so we had to let that go. But people like that privacy. At the same time, they want your presence. So how do you do that? How do you do that on a video, on a one-on-one every week? And we'll talk about the sacred encounter of a one-on-one here in a second. But they also want progress. If you've read Shawn Achor's book, The Happiness Project, people want progress. Happiness is progress. They want to see the ball moving down the field. One of the first things we have to start with is ourselves. It's not about you, but it does start with you. In the Stanford study, there was a conversation about good boss and bad boss. Now, Providence has a program we call Mission Formation. And I went to this class. I'm in a 6-top. There's about 50 people in the class, and we were given a card. You got 2 minutes to write down all the things you can think of that make up a good boss. And you see some of the examples on the screen right now. I wrote down about 8 to 10, and I look up, still about 30 seconds left. Everybody's looking around. Okay, I probably did the assignment well. We had a nice conversation about what makes up a good boss. Then we flipped the card over, and we had to write down what makes up a bad boss. And unfortunately for my hand, the pen, and that little card, I went crazy for the full 2 minutes. By the time I looked up and we were done, I look up and everybody at my table's staring at me. They're like, does somebody need some therapy? And it was because I had just spent 18 months working for, and I don't talk bad about him, I think he's a good guy. He was just a bad boss. He was no longer at Providence at that point. It was a little bit therapeutic to write down all the things about a bad boss. The thing to do here is to have a conversation with your team. Go first. Talk about what does a good boss feel like to you as an employee? What does a bad boss feel like? The key to this is that we try and spend about 80% of our time plus on the good boss side, but I'm here to tell you, you will have some bad boss moments, right? Life is about positive and negative. We can try to be perfect. It's not going to happen. But the key is you have to recognize when you have those bad boss moments and apologize for it. So I would start with this. If you haven't had a conversation, if that Stanford study, if you Google it, the good boss, bad boss, it's a great conversation starter to build trust, and I'll talk about why that's important in a minute. I do think there is a secondary exercise you could do after you do this one, which is good team member, bad team member. That way you can kind of turn it around a little bit and engage the team with that. I want to talk a little bit about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I will tell you, I've been on some very high-performing teams in my life, but when I think back about the highest performing team I was on, the principal of First Team was a team that went through the Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Has everybody read this book? Yes? Got 1, 2, couple, 3. It's been around a while, but I would tell you it is probably the best way to build a high-performing team. On the right side with a pyramid that's going down, the book is about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. We talk about the fact that if there's an absence of trust, that's really one of the key first big dysfunctions. If you don't have trust, you really don't have a team. If there's fear of conflict, so people are withholding, they're not participating. If there's a lack of commitment, you can't tell if they're showing up today or not. If there's avoidance of accountability, we set deadlines, but nobody does their part. If there's an inattention to results, those are the 5 dysfunctions we're talking about. And I'm going to go through each of those in a second. But the key is to focus on what the building on the left side, the pyramid that's going up. Force on collective outcomes, confront difficult issues, force clarity, closure, mind for conflict, and go first. And so I'm going to walk through each of those and give some specific stories of how that works. Before I do, I want to share kind of a mental model that I've always had. I'm not sure. Did anybody play Stratego when they were a child? Okay, I got a few. Okay, good. People my age probably. Stratego is basically chess with a hidden element. So there's some deception, there's some bluffing. There's key pieces, though. Those are in the blue and red, and each piece has a certain characteristic. And it may not feel appropriate to think about your staff this way, but everybody does have a gift. The key is to figure out what it is. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes you see it before they do. But the key is to double down on those gifts. I think we spend too much time focused on those things they're not good at, trying to get those to rise. Meanwhile, I'm passing on the fact that some of this stuff just comes easily to them. So you have to figure out what stratego piece they are. Now, if you have a spy, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but selection is so important, right? I'm right now interviewing about 2 to 3 people a week. And all the social proof is where we start. We look at the resume, we see where they worked, we talk about technical skills. I have a min spec on my team. I have to have an accounting degree. I have to have somebody who understands debits and credits. It's kind of one of those things. There's a lot of folks that work in finance that don't, but I feel like you've got to have that. I've tried finance folks. If I can't explain the debits and the credits part of it, I just can't get there. So everybody has their own min specs, but we use behavioral hiring as well. Everybody knows the questions, right? Tell me a time when you've had conflict, what was it, how'd you resolve it, all that stuff. People all know those, they memorize the answers. But some of the best questions I prefer are flow questions. I talk about a time when you're working on something and you look up and go, my God, 3 hours went by. Time stood still. I kind of want to know what you were doing at that time. Was it in a group? Were you solving a problem collectively? Were you sales? What were you doing? Were you working with data is what I prefer to hear, right? Because I'm actually staffing and scripting somebody to be a financial analyst, and they spend a lot of time moving data around, coming up with the conclusions, and then meeting about it. I do need to cast people correctly in the job, and so I tend to use flow questions first and foremost. Also in the interviews, I'm always looking for, are they looking for a job? Is there a sense of a career arc? Or is there somehow a sense of calling here? Is there a purpose that's coming through the screen? It's kind of weird to be interviewing folks by the screen, by the way. I'm realizing now I've hired somebody, I actually haven't met with them. They've been with us about 9 months. It's met with them in person. That's actually a bad thing. So we're trying to get some quarterly meetings so we actually get in the room together. That seems awful weird to me, but that's kind of where we're at now. I'm also looking for emotional intelligence, right? Is it about the team or is it about me? Next to that, of course, is development. I'm always looking for somebody willing to learn, advance. I want to know if they want my job or not. I prefer to hire folks that want the brass ring, but the reality is not everybody can be going after the CFO job, because there'll be some disappointments along the way. At the base of the pyramid is always the start, which is trust, right? That's the foundation. And the reality is the leader must go first. And I would tell you the best exercise ever for a team to build trust from square one is the personal histories exercise. That is to talk about your education, your history, your life, your valleys. You got to make sure and talk about the peaks and valleys. Last year, if you heard me talk, the summer of 1997 for me was a combination of the best of times and the absolute worst of times. That summer fueled me for the next 20 years. And you got to share that kind of stuff. And people will start talking about the crosses that they carry that you have no idea they have, and we all have them. And that's when trust starts to show up, right? When people start to share that level of detail, that's when you form a team. The next one would be a team effectiveness exercise. Now, I would tell you, I think this is better with a professional facilitator, because this exercise basically is to go around a circle. Maybe there's 8 of you in a circle building a team, and you talk about the 2 things that each person actually you think adds to the team, right? What are their strengths? And then you also add something that you feel like, hey, maybe you could work on this. I would tell you, I did this back in, I want to say 2005 maybe, on a team that actually had a professional facilitator. Last summer, I had lunch with somebody that I used to work with. She's now the chief executive of a Spokane Eye Clinic. She's great. Her name's Jan Simpson, if you haven't met her. I think she was in HFMA many moons ago. Jan, after the lunch had concluded, there was a few of us talking. We'd known each other now for 20-something years. She brought up that exercise. She says, Sean, I don't know if you remember or not. I don't remember what the positive thing you told me was, but when you told me that basically when you were speaking, I talked over you, thank God you told me that, because I'm now the chief executive of 27 physicians. I've got this board. I have to listen more than I talk. And she's an extrovert. She thinks out loud. And that's one of the things that drove me crazy. As I'm talking, I felt like, she immediately starts talking. It's not that she's a bad person. She just needed to hear that. She still remembered that some 15 years later. So this can go really deep when you're building a team. I remember they told me a couple things. One is they appreciated my deep wisdom. And then they said, sometimes when problems show up, we look around and you're not there. You vanish. You withdraw. And I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that in order to hit leadership in particular, because you cannot withdraw from your team. Now, all of us know there's full 360s. Those can be a little dangerous. You've got to be ready for a cold shower, because if it's anonymous, you are going to get some feedback. You got to remember it's a bell curve. There's always going to be somebody at the right end of it who's got nothing great to say about you no matter what, right? And then you got the other side that really doesn't care at all. It's the people in the middle that really want to give you some quality feedback. So 360s work. I talked about personalysis last year. I'm going to show you another way I think of personalysis here in a minute. And then I do think experiential gatherings, quarterly gatherings, volunteering. My team goes to the soup kitchen down at the Catholic Charities. There's something about building a bond and serving folks directly, especially for finance folks who sometimes don't feel like they're connected to the mission as much as they could because they don't see the patients. The second part of the dysfunctions is really mining for conflict. Now, I would tell you, I've had a chief operating officer I've worked with now for the last 12 years. I think of her as my sister, right? She calls me her brother and sister. In fact, we got a little pinky swear that we do together because we have healthy conflict. I see the world completely different than she does. Now, she's an RN, I'm a CFO, CPA, right? We just have these intense debates. In fact, people come to our meetings and go, my God, do you guys actually like each other? It is intense, but I feel like we've built something that's special, right? There is a trust there. There's ability for me to speak up. There's ability for her to go, you're not right there. Now, publicly, I say she's right 80% of the time, but I would tell you privately, I'm right 80% of the time. So she's a great partner. It started with conflict. We've gone through 7 chief executives while the 2 of us have been there. We're the 2 that have grown this thing from 38 to over 1,000 just in Spokane. It's a great partner. It's healthy conflict. I think we bring the best of both of us. If you ever go to one of our team meetings, you'll see lively, productive meetings, right? It does include all points of view. There's nobody holding back. You've got to throw it all out on the table. It does solve problems sometimes very quickly, right? We just get out to it. Just get to it. It does minimize silos, hoarding, politics, turf wars. The third part of the pyramid is really getting a commitment, right? And one of the things about commitment is making sure you've got clarity and buy-in from the team. There's 2 hurdles to that. One is sometimes we think we've got to have absolute consensus for decisions. And I'm here to tell you that's just not going to happen, right? There's always somebody that walks out of that room that doesn't agree, and you've got to mine for that. There's also a fact that, especially finance folks, they prefer certainty. We'd like to be accurate 100% of the time. That's also not possible. And so some of the tools that I think are the best in this area is really using an elevator speech. There is an interesting phenomenon when you have a conversation, say 45 minutes, you think you've made a decision, and then you ask everybody just in 2 or 3 sentences, write down what you think we just decided. And then you go around the room and you read those, you find out there's 8 different versions of the reality, right? So the key there is creating collectively an elevator speech you can all grab and walk out of there so you've got the same message. It's very powerful. Really sends to the outside that this team is all together. It's the most powerful tool I think I've used. When you're facilitating a meeting, I think Fist of 5 is a public voting thing. So does anybody know what the Fist of 5? It's a GE tool. Basically, you go around the room. A 5 means you're in total agreement. A 1, and you got to be careful what finger they use, but a 1 means they don't agree at all, right? And so what I say is that you've got to be a 4 or 5 on a collective decision. That way we march out of here with our speech. If you're a 1, 2, or 3, we got to keep going. We got to keep understanding, because sometimes people have a perspective you've got to take into account, and they know something you're not thinking of. We talk about making sure there's deadlines. My team in particular is very analytical, and they love doing pro formas. And one of the things we came up with, I think it satisfied and scratched an itch, is that sometimes operations will give you the best case scenario, right? They give you some assumptions, there's just no way that's happening. And so one of the things we do is kind of come up with best, most likely, and worst case scenario. Now, I would tell you I've spent most of my life in the worst case scenario. People that know me know I can think through what's possibly going to go wrong here. I'm sure of it, right? I don't know where that comes from. It's just the way I'm wired. I do think of worst case scenario first, but I think having 3 different versions basically satisfies the financial itch. We can still publish a pro forma with that best case scenario, but we make sure we understand where that came from. The last part is just making sure there's thin slicing for low risk decisions. When I'm a blue-green on the person analysis, means I got to have data and I got to understand how it all fits together. Sometimes that takes too long, especially for folks that you work with. If you know person analysis, if they're action-oriented, I just got to check the box today, I need a decision right now. But the problem is we've done this for a long time. My team has collectively about 112 years of finance accounting for healthcare. We've seen probably everything, right? So I got to teach folks to go, you don't need to go through that much detail. Thin slicing does actually work when it comes to finance work. Accountability is a key area. One of the things that I think as a leader, you need to talk about what standards mean to your staff. Everybody has a slightly different understanding. I always talk about this grid on the right side that basically says if there's poor performance, you're probably going to get nothing, right? If there's good performance, you're probably still going to get poor rewards. You can still get right-sized, downsized, outsourced with good performance. You can be excellent and still just get good. Sometimes we line up, just happened a few weeks ago, there were 600 IT folks at Providence. The announcement came that a third of you will be let go in the next few months, right? I'm sure some of those folks were doing excellent work. Unfortunately, that's healthcare right now. There was layoffs. The key is to try and shoot for outstanding. Now, the problem is most of your high achievers will shoot for perfection, and perfection is a prison. And I think you just have to remind folks, perfection is not achievable. It's not really a standard. We're really looking for outstanding. I need an iteration out today. I need it to be your best work. People like to focus on and get everything pristine. And that's the beauty of our staff, but it's also letting them know what standards. I'm okay with outstanding. It should stand out. It doesn't have to be perfect. The other one in the blue box there, you probably can't read it, is really about Kaizen. We spent a lot of time up at St. Joe's with Gary Peck in particular about Gemba Kaizen, about constant and never-ending improvement. The risk here as a leader is if you're constantly looking for improvement, eventually folks start to go, man, is this ever good enough? Right? So you've got to check yourself. It's good to have continuous improvement, but there is a limit to it. So you've got to celebrate along the way. And I'm sharing that not because that hasn't been me in the past. This one at the top, obviously focusing on collective outcomes is key. Where focus goes, energy flows, right? In my case, I've got system goals. I've got divisional goals. The organization have goals. I'm in a line of business called the medical group. In a hospital system, we have goals. There's a finance scheme goals. There's individual goals. Now, the reality of all that, if there's too many goals, you have none, right? So we've got to focus our staff in on the top 3, make sure we can explain why, making sure we've got leading and lagging indicators, making sure actions, priorities, and making sure autonomy is there so they can achieve it. Now I'm going to talk about entrainment for a second, and I might get a little heady with you. There is a reality about putting biological systems or physical systems together. Sometimes you'll notice there's signal frequency in trains. And so the best example of that, back to St. Joe's Hospital in Chewelah, executives used to go up to Priest Lake, Idaho for retreats. And my boss came back one day and said, Douglas, we're going to take all 250 staff in Chewelah to a retreat. I think he probably had to pick me off the ground because I was thinking about the cost of that. But he did it, right? He was up Chewelah Peak at 49 degrees north. If everybody knows where that is, it's a ski resort. It was actually in the summer. We went up to this huge meadow. There's this building called the Chewelah Peak Learning Center. It's a phenomenal place. The company that we hired to do this, and we took everybody up there, I think in 50 to 60 members at a time, they hired a company to do a drum circle. Now, last year, you learned, if you heard me speak, I'm a percussionist, right? I was a drummer since I was 5, played up till I was 18, and I always feel like my work now is being a CFO drummer. I keep the cadence, the rhythm of business. I kind of speed us up, I slow us down. We had a drum circle, and I thought, all right, I got this, right? I figured there's no way in heck this group's going to do very well at this. I would tell you, within seconds of them giving us these strokes, everybody entrained. It was actually unbelievable to sit there. Has anybody been through a drum circle? It might be a little too heady for CFO types, CPA types. I really recommend it, but to sit there and have 50 folks, many of which have never played a drum in their life, and to have the rhythm actually entrained like that is unbelievable. It happens with large audiences, right? When people start applauding, you start to notice all the clapping is entrained. What I'm getting at here is, as a leader, if you're running around talking about overwhelm, if you're talking about burnout, if you're talking about the economic winter we're in and there's layoffs, right, which I've mentioned now at least twice, people are going to entrain to that. And so the question is, where are you leading from? Are you leading with love? Are you pointing out that we're doing what we love in service of others who love what we do? Are you setting the bar high so they entrain at a higher level? Because that will suck the energy out of a company if it's all about the burnout. I would tell you, I've got a group of folks. It started with a physician. They started talking about burnout. And the next thing you know, are you burning out? I feel like I'm burning out. Are you burning out? I think I'm burning out. You know, it's the conversation was all about burnout. Now, I'm not being critical about that, but I find it a little surprising for folks, especially who've gone on and done all of this education, I think, to be called to something as a doctor. They took a Hippocratic oath, and then to hear them talking about burnout, I struggle with that a little bit. Now, on the other hand, it is my job to remove those burdens. And so if there's a particular part of their job that's burning out, and I would tell you it is the medical record, right? It is the documentation. We call it pajama time. Doctors are spending all of their nights catching up on what they did all day. And we've got to figure out a way to remove that time, because that is real burnout. But in general, I think we've got to talk about the possibilities. We've got to start in training our folks to think about love, think about something higher. David Hawkins has an energy model. I won't go into it too much. But if you're leading with love, sometimes the synchronicities that show up in your life are unbelievable. So I just encourage you to ask, what kind of words are we using with our team, right? Where are we setting the bar? What are we asking them to entrain to? As we understand and appreciate our staff, one of the things Providence has is a promise that's called know me, care for me, ease my way. It can be a little bit catchy, a little bit kitschy, but I think when we ask our folks, what do we love? What do you hate? What are you excited about? What are you proud about? Those are great conversations, right? Sometimes we don't talk about that. We sit there, we talk about the pro forma, we talk about this that has to be done in the next 6 minutes. We talk about Dr. Jones, who's upset his bonus wasn't the right amount. We don't step back to have these conversations. I use a couple tools. One's called the personal and professional wheel of life. The professional wheel of life is the one that's probably easier to understand. I take their job description. There's 8 categories. We just did performance evaluations, but I check in with them. We kind of establish what their score is in those various areas, both their perspective and mine. And one of the nice things about it is if you do it year over year, you start to see progress. And again, progress is happiness. So we can talk about the fact being a missionary is one of the job description items. Now, missionary, not in a way that you're probably thinking, but it's to be connected to the mission of Providence. And finance in general tends to score low in that. So if you ask them, how are we connecting to the mission? They give you a 4, and then this year it's a level 6. You can start to have a conversation about what's different. What did we do different over the last year? How can we make that an 8 this next year, right? How do we get that professional wheel of life up? So it's not all just about working in Excel all day long. Having these conversations lets you start to understand where they're living. Right? It's when things start to come up and you realize there's something going on at home. There's something going on in their health. Hopefully they're sharing some of that with you. My preference is they share as much as widely as they can, because there's a lot of things we can all learn from those things. Now, there's a reality some people like to be private about that, and that's okay. But we need to understand if they're living in a low energy state. Is there a ton of anxiety, fear, grief? What's going on there? Try and move them up to those high energy states of love, joy, peace, and bliss. Not always easy, but it starts with having those conversations. An Indeed survey came out as well. They were asking folks 18 to 41 about remote. And again, I talked about the fact that my folks feel religious about being remote workers now, or what I call hybrid. Funny how hybrid turned into 100% at home, and don't you ever ask me to come in again. But they asked these folks, would you ever take a job that required 100% person in full-time attendance? Generation Z said 94% of them said no way. Now the millennials, probably because they've had a taste of the office, there was only 84% of them going, well, I could probably put up a little bit of office. Next question, would you quit your current job if asked to attend in person full time? 88% of Generation Z said yes, 69% of millennials said no. And do the benefits of working from home outweigh the perks of going into an office full time? 87% say yes. Z, millennials actually higher at 89%. But all of that leads you to the fourth question, which is the problem, right? So do you feel a lack of connection with your colleagues due to working fully or partially at home? Generation Z, 94% said yes. So they were never in the office long enough to establish a connection. Perhaps they never worked in the office at all. I've got a couple, like I just mentioned, a staff like that. That's actually a problem when I look at that and go, I wonder how connected we all feel. They might be connected to me, but how are we connecting them to the broader team as well? 66% of millennials said yes, but a third of them basically said, I didn't really like connecting with them at work anyway. So I think one of the key first steps is the sacred time, the intimate presence of the one-on-one. If you're not having one-on-ones, or if you're canceling those all the time, or if they're not really on the calendar and they kind of get moving around, I encourage you to kind of bring them back to front and center. That is the sacred time we spend with our team. It's an intimate presence. Our sisters would tell us that presence is the most important time ever. It's full engagement in a life that is steeped in suffering. And sometimes we forget the suffering that's going on. You don't know all the details. And so to be there for somebody, to be that rock is important. I always start my one-on-ones with a question. It says, tell me something great. Now, I didn't create that. It actually came. I have an executive coach. I think I mentioned that before last year. I've had it now. This is the second time I've had one. And every Thursday at noon, this gentleman asks me, tell me something great. That's how he starts it every time. It took me 7 months before I go, because I had just spent the morning diagnosing and treating issues. Right? That's what we are in healthcare. As leaders, we're looking for problems, we're solving problems, we're diagnosing and treating, and so our focus is on what's broken. And so when somebody goes all of a sudden, tell me something great, you got to go, geez, I didn't prepare for that. But now, of course, I do. So I started that with my staff. I would tell you, depending on personalysis quadrant, there are folks on my team where I get and sometimes it's, well, at least it's not raining today, right? I mean, we get the shallow responses. You got to stay there until they tell you something great. It is a pattern interrupt. It is focusing them on something positive. Where focus goes, energy flows. I also have folks on my staff, especially those that are in the yellow quadrant of support, right, connection, that I will learn about Sally Sue, the aunt, the nephew's wedding next weekend. I mean, I want to live like they live because they can talk for 20 minutes about all the things great in their lives. I don't know if I'm just wired a little different. I have to work at it, right? I think I'll show you in a second how I do that. It is an engagement meter, though, these one-on-ones. I don't have an agenda often with these. I may have one or two items I want to check in, but I wait to go last. I am actively listening. I'm listening to what's being said. I'm also listening for what's not being said. I also use the 4 needs of the personality as well as the 2 needs of the spirit. I'm gauging how much certainty they need, how much variety they're looking for, if they feel connected, if they're feeling significant enough, if they're growing and contributing. I'm kind of constantly evaluating that. It's nice to have those mental models right with you. In fact, I put them up on the screen. I also am engaging kind of where are we at in this job, career, calling, right? If we haven't talked about the fact that maybe you've been called to this moment for a while, it is time to kind of bring that up once in a while. I kind of like to remind folks about. The key is that the default mode is drift. I've mentioned before that 80% of our thoughts are negative, and 95% of the thoughts we had today are the same ones we had yesterday. right? We're struggling with that. We always drift. That's the human condition. And so to tell me something great, focus on the positive, curate the discord is important, but be there for the curiosities, the passions, the purpose. Words often matter in these. I also have a mental model that ties to personalysis. Again, these are the 4 quadrants of personalysis, and I apologize. If you weren't here last year, I'm probably referring to stuff that maybe you weren't here for. Personalysis, I find, is one of the best things we've ever done as a team. It kind of allows you to not only understand your own personal behaviors, but also know if you're working with a chief operating officer who is heavily read and just wants to get stuff done, you can't take forever getting those analytics and scratching that itch in the green, right? You've got to move quickly. I tend to look at the 4 personality types and I tie them to the Jungian archetypes. Now, this was given to me actually by my coach one time. So I was engaged in a conversation with him one day, and he stops me midstream and says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess that's what we're paying you for." And he said, I just want to point out the fact you've actually used words like battle, drawing the line, firing a salvo, all these warrior words. And so he kind of caught me off guard. I was trying to describe to him, he was holding me accountable for certain things. And so he said, one of the things he said is, I need you to take the sword and put it down on the ground. Take the sword of your warrior and place it on the ground. At the same time, I need you to notice for the first time, maybe in a long time, on your left side is a wand. And I need you to be the wizard and pick up the wand. Now, I want you to think about the problems you've just described, instead of through the warrior lens, looking at it through the wizard lens. I would tell you, it's almost as if the skies parted. I felt a little embarrassed. I said, yeah, you're right. I've been doing this a long time. I don't know why this feels like a battle. I have the ideas, right? I can be the wizard. I've got some spells and potions. I think I can do this. I would tell you, this just happened a couple weeks ago, and the only reason I'm sharing it with you is I had a staff member come to me in the same route. She's not quite getting along with another leader. It feels like a battle. It's quite a slog. I feel like we're fighting all the time. And so I used the same thing, and she was quiet for at least 5 minutes on the phone. I could sense that maybe there were some tears going on there. She's the type that doesn't like the camera, by the way. By the way, I think with one-on-ones you should have the camera on, but I do acknowledge some staff, sometimes maybe they didn't shower, I don't know, but they don't want the camera on. But I asked her to use the wizard. She's been doing this for 30 years. This doesn't have to be a battle. It doesn't have to be a fight. It's just funny how certain words change our philosophy. The other sides of it, the yellows would be our lovers in the room, and then the blues are our kings and queens. And sometimes it is easy to look at problems with different lenses. So if you can step into different archetypes, now there's 12, I tend to focus on these 4 with my team, and we talk about this. This also goes like with the 9 thinking hats, which I'm not going to share here today, but there is other mental models that look at decisions in different ways. One of the keys for the team is structure, right? I think I learned this mostly from my wife. My wife is a second grade teacher. She often talks about how that first week of the year, she's an absolute bitch in that classroom. Because she has to set the tone, she has to set the structure for the rest of the year. Otherwise, you've got 9 months on your hand you'll never get back. And I think that's because maybe she had a problem that 3rd or 4th year where she was trying to be the nice queen to everybody. And so sometimes your staff do need structure. They do respond to that. We had more structure in our home, mostly from my wife. I was the dad that kind of, they don't call me Disneyland dad, but you know what I mean. The kids kind of got what they wanted with me. I wasn't as forceful as sometimes she was. She provided that structure. I definitely learned from her. When I coached soccer, one of the things I also learned, did anybody play soccer in the 1970s with me? Yes? No? Nobody? The soccer? Okay, we got some soccer. There were some tight white shorts. There were some those socks that went up to mid-thigh. I think everybody remembers this time. I remember these soccer practices. And I remember in particular, I don't know why, but we only had like 3 soccer balls. I don't know if we were all poor or what was going on. But we'd line up for a shooting drill. And there were 17 shooters and 1 goalie and the coach. And he would put the ball out in front of us, somebody would take a shot, and sure enough, it would fly off into the woods, right? So the next thing you know, all 3 balls are flying out, and we're all standing there waiting around. And so the lesson there is at a 90-minute session, sometimes you might have touched the ball 10 times, right? That's not really a soccer practice. That was just kind of killing time, I think, now that I think about it. So I was one of those dads when my daughter was 6, and everybody's looking around the room going, now wait a minute, you played soccer. Why don't you coach? And I had that weak moment where I said yes. Now, I'm glad I did, right? Because that went on like a decade of coaching. I got more out of that experience than probably anything else in my life. I went on to become an E-licensed coach and work for the Shadow United. And one of the things they taught us is the goal of a 90-minute session is to get at least 200 touches for every player on that team. Now, that was a radical idea to me, but they structured it this way. They had individual skills for the first 30 minutes. Those are usually groups of 3 or 4. There's 1 touch, 2 touch, there's passing, dribbling, etc. There's lots of touches that happen in those first 30 minutes. In fact, that's probably where you get 100 to 120 touches. You then move into small-sided skills. It can be 4-on-4, 5-on-5, etc. Again, lots more touches for another half hour. And then you always give them the game, meaning 30 minutes of basically a scrimmage, either 9-on-9, or perhaps you got, in my case, we used to practice right next to the boys, and I coached the girls, and of course the girls would kick the boys' behinds at that age, all the way till they're teens. But the key is that we had a structure to a practice that actually had repetition in it. And I started going, I wonder how we could apply that at work with our finance teams. What are those one-on-one drills that we can get more touches? What are those small-sided skills where they can get in a room and kind of work together on projects? And what is the game exactly? What is the game for a senior financial analyst? If they want to be the CFO, it's making key decisions, it's making presentations, it's being in a room with a bunch of executives, it's giving them a chance to have those repetitions. And so I feel like that coaching soccer is actually what brought me to give my team more touches and reps and to think of it that way, right? How do I give them more of what they're looking for? It makes it a little hard when you're at home, right? And that's where the key conversation is. If you want to move up in an organization, sometimes you have to be in proximity to the leaders that you want to work with. And so it's one of the things I keep mentioning. If you want to move up, you've probably got to work in the office at least a little bit. You got to form these relationships with these chief operating officers, CEOs, et cetera. Now, I talked a lot about my gratitude journal and gratitude practice last year, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I would tell you the mother of skill really is first and foremost is self. It's entrainment with gratitude. Our teachers, our sisters have taught us at Providence about sacred silence. We start every meeting with a reflection. So anytime we get in a room and we're there for an hour, we're to talk about an issue, the first 5 to 10 minutes are actually a reflection, usually on one of our values, it could be on a quote, etc. It's a pattern interrupt. It brings you back to go, hey, you got to let go of everything that happened all morning and focus in on the fact that we're here supporting the mission and this meeting is important. It really is a powerful tool. I still use the gratitude journal. I told you last year, I have the app. You can actually print out the books. I've got those since 2015 in my home safe. There is meditation, there's mindfulness. Sisters obviously use prayer, incantation. There's a lot of things where we have to let go, having our folks kind of coaching our staff to let go, the hindsight window, right, closing that stuff up. Our teachers teach us, our sisters teach us we've got to go inward first so that we show up in the right way. I would say this in particular is probably the most important slide in my thing. If you don't have a daily gratitude practice, kind of centering yourself, it's time to start one, right? If there aren't symptoms of inner peace and bliss that just kind of show up in your day, it's time to kind of get back to this. And as leadership in times where it's economic crisis, all these things going on, this is probably the most important skill that I've learned over time. For your team, it's always about creating magic moments. We have to have more celebration. Sometimes we just kind of get in this rhythm, it's just checking stuff off, and we never stop to really celebrate what we actually accomplished. Quarterly team and gatherings and socials. I've already mentioned the soup kitchen, the 5 dysfunctions of a team model. I am trying to do more one-on-one lunches, right? Taking folks out to break bread, so that one-on-ones are usually on camera, but if we can go out and sit in a restaurant, actually get to see the whites of their eyes, I'm finding that's a nice tool that's working well. Obviously, education and retreats. I would say budgets are tight, but obviously HFMA, thank God for your employers and you're allowed to be here, or thank God you're taking the time to be here. Our staff need to be here as well, but we got to get the budgets back to get folks in these kind of events. I would tell you, I got more out of that Las Vegas event than I thought I needed. It was a great session. Lastly, I would say the hero's journey, right? There is a reality that our folks are on the hero's journey at various times. They might all be, Tom Cruise, right, where he's realizing his career's over, his program's about to get shut down. He's told he's got to go back to Top Gun. He refuses to go. His old mentor, his old partner, his mentor now, Iceman, coaches him. He's got to take the challenge, right? It's the hero's journey. We all love those kind of shows. The reality is all of our staff are in some form of that journey right now, right? I don't know if they're fighting the dragon. I don't know if they're just about to cross the threshold, but it's up to us to kind of have those conversations and figure out where they are and kind of coach them through. Maybe you're the wise sage to get them to the next level. Steve Farber, if you haven't read Love is Just Damn Good Business, I do recommend it. That's where that phrase comes from, do what you love in service of others who love what you do. There's various questions for self-reflection. I do highly recommend it. This, I'm going to let you under the tent a little bit. This is, last fall, I did an exercise where I asked folks to send me on my team their favorite quotes. Now, I've got some folks on my team, and you can kind of tell by looking at it. If you look on the right side, I guess it's the right side for you. I had a gentleman, my youngest on the team, kind of send me in a quote saying, "You're killing me, Smalls," right? I asked for the quotes that might inspire you, and he sends me that, right? And that says a lot about him. Now, I laugh at that. Now, here's the thing about him. He wanted the brass ring, and he's quite good, and he decided to move on last Friday. And so we called the team together. We had just an informal chat. We're cheering him on. I'm really excited he's going to move on. He's staying within Providence, but going to work down in our Los Angeles area. He's ready to become a people person. I didn't have that opportunity on my team, and so we're here to cheer him on. I'm hoping he comes up with a better quote than that now, that he's going to be a leader of people. But I also read a prayer. We celebrated him and said goodbye, right? And that's an emotional moment. It's hard to see people leave, but I'm excited for him because he spent 4 years with me, and I hope he got something out of it. I think he'll do well. As you look at the quotes around the thing, though, you start to go, well, there's a lot about love. There's a lot about faith. The oldest person on my team, if you see the quote there, "This too shall pass." It might pass like a kidney stone, but it will pass. And I think there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in that. There's a lot of laughter that goes with it, but she's been through a lot. In fact, she's had kidney stones, she mentioned, but she's been through so many projects that nothing really phases her. She's somebody I really can count on. She's been at Providence for 27 years. I'm sorry, 40 years. So there's a lot going on up here. Now, I would tell you there's another quote right beneath that. And it's a quote about being thankful for all the struggles in their life. This is from a person on my team who's been in Providence 27 years. Whose mom committed suicide when she was 8, got married really young, had 2 boys. The husband decides to depart, leaves her hanging. She raised those boys basically by herself. As a grandma, she has grandkids. There's one grandkid with a congenital heart disease. He's at Sacred Heart, spends most of his little life in the NICU and passes away, and I'm watching that trauma develop. And I'm thinking about her, talking about her struggles, and thank God for them, because without it, I wouldn't find my strength. And that's somebody on my team that I need to remove any barrier I can, because she's had more suffering than I will ever have. And thank God she shared all that, right? I wouldn't know that. I wish she wouldn't have to share about her mom. I'm not going to mention her name, but that is so key, right? I look at that and I just feel the strength. My job is to make sure I don't put her flame out. It's already been ignited because of the suffering and the inner strength that she's built up. So in final thoughts, all of this kind of leads to igniting the spark, right? It's about servant leadership. It's doing what we love in service of others who love what we do. It's about creating a compelling future. It's about using the right words at the right time at the right place. It's developing that supportive structure. It's about setting standards and clearing out all these rules that we have. If then, if this, then that. There's too many rules in life. Set the game up to win, right? Have a shared mindset. Enjoy this journey. We've got to make sure we're enjoying all of this. And then last but not least, I would just tell you got to keep going. As a leader, it's hard when people step forward and say, I've decided to step off the bus. And I just had a gentleman in Montana decide that he's been with healthcare for about 18 months. He was a great hire. He was at a CPA firm in Alaska. I took a chance, no healthcare experience, but a former client calls, and I understand that. And the next thing you know, he's going to go work for this client, and I'm left now searching, right? I'm excited for him, but I have to remind myself the parable of the sower. And so I leave you with that, knowing that as leaders, we're constantly casting seeds on various types of soil. Sometimes we throw the seeds down and the wind blows it away before we get a chance. Sometimes we throw the seeds down and it's on shallow ground, and they might have a little plant sitting there, but the first sign of a storm or the first sign of a heat wave, a layoff, some financial stress, the next thing you know, they're gone. Sometimes we throw the seeds down and it's on thorny ground. And a nice plant may form, and then all of a sudden you start to notice the cares of the world. Maybe they got passed up for a promotion, you didn't give them the raise they wanted, they didn't get the assignment they wanted. All these thorns start taking them down. And you have to keep sowing. Sometimes we throw the seeds on rocky ground. Maybe a really nice plant forms, maybe there's a nice harvest with it, but you realize there's these boulders in the way, there's these rocks that are holding them back, there's some beliefs, there's some childhood trauma, whatever it is, and they can't grow into their full abundant opportunity because of those rocks, and so we keep sowing. And sometimes we do throw those seeds down, everything works out. The soil is perfect, there's a lot of nurturing, there's an abundant harvest, we grab more seeds and we keep sowing. I would just ask you to keep going, keep igniting the spark, keep making a difference, and keep leading with love. Thank you. I have to acknowledge Tom Dingus in the room here. It's been a while since I've seen Tom. Tom's one of the reasons I'm up here right now. I don't know if he knows this or not, so I'll say it publicly. Tom was in Toastmasters 160, was it 160? Long time ago. And Tom was getting out of Toastmasters, and I was the staff that worked right below him, or a couple levels down, and he mentioned, hey, Toastmasters is looking for somebody to join. I didn't know he was jumping out, but I was jumping in. And I really enjoyed it. I spent 2 years every Monday morning, 6:45, in Toastmasters, kind of working on skills because of Tom Dingus. And I now realize I'm standing up here because of that moment, so thank you for that.
Sean. Oh, go ahead.
For questions or comments from anybody, raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone so that everybody can,
I got a question.
hear you. Except Jesse. No, go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks. Sean, before I go there too, just as far as, I want to know, you're going to get surveys on your emails for yesterday. They weren't working as far as the surveys for the sessions. And then you will also get one after the conference. So make sure you fill out the surveys. So that's just the PSA. So, yeah, that's right. PSA.
PSA? Yeah.
I thought of like agreements, like physician agreements or something. Anyways, you said thin slicing.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can give an example of that, because I like that as far as understanding, knowing that a lot of people we do a lot of analysis.
Yep.
Could take a long time, but then what's a good example or two?
So I think the best example is stewardship for us. Now, stewardship is a process at Providence where if you want to replace a staff or you want to add a staff, there's a whole bunch of analysis that goes in it. The reality when it's a replacement staff, especially if it's core staffing for a physician, if you've established the fact that every physician needs at least one MA, and if they're highly productive, you might be talking about 2, maybe a little bit more, there really is no need to go through that much rigmarole, right? I don't know if I need a full S-bar. I certainly don't need a full pro forma. I really know what the answer is. And so sometimes it's just giving permission because we have these structures set up at Providence where stewardship is just taken so seriously. So that'd be an example where as long as we understand the criteria, we understand the staffing, we just thin slice that thing and make that decision faster. I think it can also happen in the area of growth. If we've got a medical oncology team of 3 physicians, we know we need a 4th, they're all producing at the 75th. I don't know if I necessarily need the full pro forma. We just have an old tradition of wanting that level of service. Especially if you lose staff, you got to thin slice, because if you're doing this long enough, you got to take a risk. So I guess is that responsive? I think those are a couple of, yeah. Again, sometimes it's removing the rules we set up, right? Yeah, exactly.
Comments or questions?
So I'm just kind of curious. I know you probably have a mix of people that
Yeah.
work for you that, some are still working in the office, maybe part-time, and some are fully remote. And, the reality is we have people that work for us that live across the country
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah.
So I know you were giving some of your thoughts around, well, I'm trying to connect with them more in
Yeah.
person.
They fly around.
But, the reality of trying to fly across the country is really not a reality
Yeah.
at all. It's maybe a wishful thinking.
Yeah.
So how do you connect with those individuals, knowing that all you're probably going to get is screen time with them?
Yeah, that's a great point. One of our requirements, one of our rules is that we got to have folks in the footprint, meaning if I'm serving the Tri-Cities area, I do need you kind of living in the Kennewick, Pasco, Richland area, Spokane, same thing, Missoula, same thing. The reality is I do have some folks that like in Walla Walla, in Missoula, and I guess now that I think about it, those folks, our connection is just that sacred moment on the one-on-one. Now, I am going out to those places, probably quarterly, so that might be a little different, but obviously if you're going to fly from here to Boston, that's probably an annual event. So I don't know how to answer that other than I think making sure your one-on-ones are consistent, they're sacred, they're time spent together. That's probably the reality. I don't know if there's a chance for any kind of annual retreat. You can bring folks in, that's sometimes good, full immersion. Budgets are tight, though. We used to bring everybody in for quarterly meetings all the time, and all that stuff's evaporated. So I get it. The resources are tight. One-on-ones is the key. It's probably all you got left.
Question for you.
Yeah.
In terms of provider burnout, my brother's a doctor, my mother's a nurse, and their burnout comes more from dealing with the worst people on their worst day,
Yep.
and then putting bodies and bodies and bodies into morgues. How do you account for that? Do you guys make, counselors available for them to speak with, so they can vent, so they can talk about it? Because they don't want to bring it home to their families and talk to their wives or children or even their son or brother about that
Yeah.
as well, as much as we might try.
Yep.
That's, I think, is a bigger cause of the burnout.
I agree with that. I don't mean to minimize burnout from that perspective. I know oncology physicians in particular, you form a relationship with somebody, right? And it's all about hope, and you think things are going well, and the next thing that doesn't always work out. We do have counselors. There are psychologists on staff. There are some system things that I'm not sure I'm fully aware of what physicians have access to. There are ways to kind of deal with that. I can't even imagine really dealing with that every day. So I don't know exactly if I can respond to that fully, but I do acknowledge that. I round right now once a week, and I'm still going into our clinics. And it's really weird for me because I'm out here in this world where there's not well, there might be a mask somewhere in here, but I think I saw one. But in general, we're not wearing masks, right? Unless you go into those healthcare settings right now. Now, starting April 24th, I think we're actually moving away from the masks for the first time forever, and I think they're going to rejoice. But they're still living in that environment, right? So I understand that, and there can be some learned helplessness that goes with that, and that's where burnout really starts to take hold. I can't imagine being a clinician that works with folks that has that much tragedy all the time. So appreciate the question. Not sure I responded fully, but yeah, sorry.
Hi,
Judy.
Sean. How are you?
Long time.
I just saw an article by AARP. They did a survey of people who retired, what's one of the downsides? And in all the different careers, including physicians, it was missing the people they worked with and the relationships
Yeah.
that they couldn't sustain on, even with good family. The reward is the relationship. And that slide that you gave us, isn't that intriguing? Where will that go with the remote workers who are not really forming those? That reward isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It does remind me, my grandfather, 39 years at Chevron as an executive, and 6 months after he retired, he passed away of cancer. And I think that served to me as a warning, right, to enjoy the journey more. And I think it's also because I still keep in touch with folks that are retired from me, because I'm slightly worried if you don't have something after retirement that's going to drive you, I do think sometimes it doesn't work out so well. But you're right, I guess we're not forming the deep relationships of being in a room for 8 hours at a time. I am worried about that. That says something about our society too at large, probably. Good to see you.
We got time for maybe one more question. Otherwise, we'll close the session. One of the things I liked about what you said, Sean, was that you did some things that were hard for you to do as you expanded your leadership capability, and I appreciate that, because sometimes you look at these structures or these ways of evaluating people, and it is, kind of stretching into areas where you're not so strong. So I appreciate you admitting that some of those things were difficult for you. I appreciated it. As a thank you, we're making a donation in your name to the Susan G. Komen Foundation.
Thank you.
Let me give you that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you.